This man is about to die. He is one of many millions throughout the world who have suffered death from smallpox over thousands of years. But he will be one of the last. Any one of these men and women may catch smallpox at any moment. If they do, there is no effective treatment that can help them. They are living in one of the few remaining areas where smallpox is still endemic, an area where people have had to accept death and blindness from smallpox as a curse that had to be endured. Less than 10 years ago, this would have been just as true for people in South America, most of Africa, the majority in Asia and Indonesia. Now, there are only 3 countries left where men and women run any risk of catching smallpox. The last battle is being fought now against a terrifying disease for which there is no cure. A disease which kills 1 in 4 of all the people who catch it. A disease which causes terrible suffering and blindness and which scars for life every person who survives it. To understand this war against smallpox, you must look at the countries where the last battles are being fought. This is Ethiopia, a country as big as France and Spain put together, where half the population of 26 million people live more than a day's walk from the nearest road. In rural Ethiopia, there are 2 places where people are absolutely sure to meet. A local market is one of them. And therefore it is here that health workers come to try to track down new outbreaks. By showing pictures of the disease, they try to persuade people to identify anyone they know who has caught it. In schools, even a town school like this, there may be a child who has traveled many miles from his own village. If just one of them can recognize the disease, then the health workers will have the information they need. In this country school, a doctor from Brazil is now carrying on the fight that has already been won in his own country. In an Ethiopian school like this one, the children may come from far distant homes, and therefore the children have become a most effective information network for their own particular area. Time and again they draw a blank, no cases, nobody knows. And then quite suddenly it can happen. Not in his village, but somewhere where he knows of a case, somewhere on the map that they can identify. Now it begins. They can act. First, a report to the local headquarters run by the Ethiopian government and the World Health Organization. Another possible outbreak, another pin on a map. The problem now is not to find where the place is. Although they can identify it well enough, the difficulty is to get there. In most of Ethiopia, communications have hardly changed in thousands of years, and a local messenger will think nothing of walking for 4 days. You may have a vehicle, but that will probably only get you a very small part of the way. With luck, it will be possible to travel by mule. If not, then you go on foot. In this case, there were mules. Nevertheless, the journey took nearly 2 days. It's all very well to be ready to spring into action, but in Ethiopia, that sort of enthusiasm has to keep going for a long time. And even at the end of a journey like this, it can be a wild goose chase. In this case, it wasn't. The woman did have smallpox, just as the boy at school had said. Not a very serious case as it happened, but the point of finding her was not to cure her. Nobody can do that. The aim on this occasion, just like all the rest, was to track down and vaccinate any person who had had any contact with her, to stamp out the outbreak before it could spread any further. So another team joined in to find and follow up some of the contacts and to vaccinate anybody who could possibly have the slightest chance of catching the disease. And you might think that all this would be a lot easier if they simply launched a massive scheme to vaccinate all 26 million people who live in Ethiopia. But this would be difficult and very expensive. And in some other countries, it has been proved that even if you manage to vaccinate 95% of the entire population, you still don't eradicate the disease. Smallpox may continue to spread among those who have still not been vaccinated. The only way is to do what these men are doing and follow up each individual outbreak, deal with it, and then move on to the next. Search and stop the outbreaks. It's basically this approach rather than mass vaccination which has made the final eradication of smallpox not only a possibility, but a certainty. In Ethiopia, there is still some way to go. The searching goes on, an international effort that is growing in size and intensity every day. There are now only 3 endemic countries left. But the men fighting smallpox come not only from these areas, they come from all over the world. Each government still concerned in the battle is cooperating and working under the guidance of the World Health Organization here in Geneva. It's to this building, outwardly so remote from the battle, that information is fed in about every new outbreak so far discovered. This building is the nerve center of the whole operation, and the international team working here are able not only to see exactly how the battle is going day by day, but also to use the information coming in to plan and to give advice to the actual areas where the work is going on. Here they have every modern aid available, even a computer that can help assess the latest information and detect changes and trends happening far away, either in Africa or Asia. As soon as the information has been transcribed, it is sent out partly by automatic teleprinter. Anyone who needs the facts can get them at any time, or wait for the printed bulletin that goes out from Geneva every week of the year. And not only to the affected countries, but to every part of the world where travellers arrive by air, sea or road, bringing with them the danger of a possible outbreak of smallpox. As recently as 1972, a bus entered Yugoslavia carrying a Muslim pilgrim on his way home. He had smallpox. The result of that one case was disaster. For more than 40 years there had been no smallpox in Yugoslavia, and 4 weeks passed before the disease was recognized. Not until a 17-year-old girl had died did the authorities realize what had happened. They moved fast, but the disease had already spread. Within another 2 weeks, 11 cases became over 100. 25 areas were affected. It was obvious that large numbers of workers would have to be used to track down the cases and their contacts. And on top of that, it was decided that although Yugoslavia had a system of compulsory vaccination, they would try to vaccinate every person again. In 3 weeks, out of a population of 21 million, they vaccinated 18 million people, even the newborn babies. Anyone who had been in direct contact with a case was put into absolute quarantine, either at home or in a special center. The outbreak was brought under control in 6 weeks. Only by then, 175 people had caught the disease and 35 had died. If the Yugoslavians ever forget the spring of 1972, there will be plenty of people with enough scars to remind them. Since the 18th century, when Jenner discovered the use of cowpox for vaccination, there have been many improvements. Most recently, the discovery that vaccine can be successfully freeze-dried. Vaccine is now manufactured in the endemic areas themselves, and thanks to the freeze-drying process, it has become almost totally reliable even in hot climates. But it's in the administration of the vaccine that the greatest advances have been made. Instead of complicated, though efficient machinery like this, in 1968, the World Health Organization introduced the bifurcated needle, which has revolutionized the job of vaccination. One man can now successfully vaccinate up to 1,000 people in one day, using much less vaccine than with the older methods. Even in areas like Indonesia, where the disease has disappeared, it is still important to check and make absolutely sure that travellers have not reintroduced the infection. In Gambia and in other parts of West Africa, smallpox is also a thing of the past, and you might think the health authorities could be forgiven for forgetting all about it. They haven't. It takes years of careful and steady surveillance before a country can say it is over. Within living memory, smallpox has been the scourge of almost every country in the world. In Gambia, the teams working on immunization against measles are also checking against smallpox, using the same photographs, only hoping this time that nobody will recognize the symptoms. One arm for measles and one arm for smallpox. Any country that has known what it is like to have the disease takes very great care to see that it never comes back. The very last case of all will almost certainly occur somewhere in Asia, either here in Bangladesh or the north of India. Even using all the familiar techniques, and with more and more helpers coming in from the endemic countries as well as from elsewhere in the world, it is still difficult to find the cases and then track down the contacts. When people live as close to each other as they do here, one man with a disease can spread it among a very large number of people in a very short time. And like many people who live in rural communities around the world, they don't always tell you or even admit it if there is a case hidden away in a village. However, a reward of 100 rupees is now given to anyone who reports an outbreak, and finding cases has now become easier. The end is finally in sight. The disease is being brought out into the light of day. The endemic areas are being steadily pushed into ever smaller and smaller parts of the countries concerned. The Bangladesh and the Indian governments are working together with an ever-increasing team of doctors and volunteers, so that children like this will have a chance to grow up without the threat of death, disfigurement, or blindness from smallpox. A program to totally eradicate smallpox from the world was started by the World Health Organization in 1967. Already, the effects of that program have been dramatic. In the United States, for instance, because of the work going on in faraway places like this, the government has been able to drop most of its measures against smallpox. More than $100 million is saved each year. With global eradication of the disease, savings throughout the world will amount to billions of dollars. But perhaps the important thing to remember is the way in which smallpox affects individual people, the horrible suffering that it causes, quite apart from the number of deaths. This is what the battle is all about. When the last outbreak has been found, contained, and eradicated, we shall have nothing left but pictures like these to remind us of what smallpox was. Only the pictures and the scars left on a child's face, in case we forget what the fight was all about. That and an understanding of how much can be done with so little when countries throughout the world cooperate in the fight against disease. We can only hope that the battle against smallpox will be the first step in an even stronger world battle. The tools for preventing many other diseases are available. We only have to join together and use them.